When we talk about drawing and painting someone's portrait, I want you to start looking at people as three-dimensional forms and what really gives them good volume and good shape. If we think back to our first project, the one where you had to do shading of some spheres, cones, and cubes, think on how you did that. You first had to know where the light source was coming from, and from there you figured out how the light scattered across the form. This caused the form shadows. You could also determine where the cast shadows would be, and also how they would interact with each other and have light bounce off their native color. Well, the same is true for a person's portrait. If you look closely at them, you can see spheres, you can see cones, you can see cubes, rectangles, all manner of shapes. To keep it more simple for you, we're going to break the human figure, specifically the head, into basic planes. We're not going to worry about having to smooth them over just yet. Back in the 1930s and 1940s, there was a very famous artist named Andrew Loomis. He was famous for creating a method of looking at people's figure and breaking them down into these simple planes. And so if you do a Google search for Andrew Loomis or the Loomis drawing technique, this is what comes up. Here's a picture from one of his books. In it, you can see he's taken the basic form of a head, and even though it's circular, it's shaped kind of like an egg, he's broken it down into just some basic planes. Very simple planes at first, and then more complex planes as you start to add smaller or more in detail, smaller details from that. The truth of the matter is, once we get those planes down, they're very easy to shade in. You don't have to worry about smoothing them over. So if you can paint off these planes, the basic ones first, such as you can see here, you can then add on different areas of smaller details, smaller planes, until you finally get to your finished details from the end. Here's a good black and white. Obviously this is a computer rendering, but it gives you the idea. You can tell the form, you can tell some of the basic structure of it, and everybody's anatomy is going to be different. So it forces you to see how some planes are larger or smaller or placed different on different people. From here, here's another value study. The first thing we're going to do is to do a simple value study that will look like this one on the left. Just blocking in the highlights, the dark shadows, and maybe a few midtones. Later on, as we start adding more detail, we can start adding different gradations of highlights and shadows and blending them in together. This also works in traditional media. As you can see here, all the planes are blocked in just with one solid stroke of color. We're not worrying about details at first, those will come later. So this is what we're going to do for our project first. So this is how I have my document set up. In my layers palette, I've got my photograph in one layer, and I've got a transparent layer called reference lines. In this layer, I'm going to draw off some simple lines indicating not just where the edge of my subject is, but also where the hairlines may be, where some of the major details may be, where the highlights and shadow areas may be, but also where the planes of the face may be. So I'm going to grab my brush. We're going to make this one just a very small, simple, rounded brush. A little bit smaller than that one. And I'm going to set my color to be solid black. You can work in a different color or a lower opacity, but I'm going to keep mine black just so I can turn on and off as needed. The first thing I like to do is just go around and get the outline of my entire figure. This can be very sketchy, or this can be a lot tighter. I like to do this in small, simple strokes. The more confident you get, you can do this in 1 or 2 strokes. But I like to keep mine short and simple, that way I can pick up all the good details. Once I have an indication of where some of the major outlines are, I can then zoom in and start working on some of the minor planes and more major details inside of them. So for instance, if I wanted to block off the forehead, I know that the forehead, this part right here, is one particular area to work in. So all I'm going to do is just give an indication of where that would be, and then connect it with the rest of his head. So as you can see, it's starting to build out. Very blocky, but it has its own particular plane. Same way for this area of the temple. usually moving around the eyes. This is kind of a socket set inside of his eye. All I'm doing is framing off where that shadow would be. So it would look something like this. The cheekbone has its own little plane, so I'm going to give it a little area right here. Same way for the other side. There's one plane. We can connect it with the hairline here. And also this entire side of the cheek can be considered one plane, connecting it down to the chin. All I'm really looking for is any major changes in value. Even on the nose, there's the bridge of the nose, so it looks very flat and highlighted right here. And it turns into kind of a ball shape right here. So maybe we'll give it its own individual plane. When I turn it off, now it's starting to look like this. I'm just breaking it up into different areas that are a lot more manageable, and it makes it a lot easier for me to see exactly where everything is at. Let's see. We'll continue down. Here's the edge of the jawline, which means there's about a plane break right there. Now are you starting to see the Loomis planes of the face? This is going to make it super duper easy to do some shadowing. We'll even give his lip its own plane. Another thing I like to do is also indicate where some cast shadows may be. And to do this, all I'm going to do is outline where these shadow areas may be. Here they are in the ear. It's usually a very complex and detailed area. And all I'm doing is just giving a simple outline for them. Maybe some areas along the neck. I can tell where the folds in the neck are. Here's a highlighted cast shadow, and even maybe a cast shadow on his shirt. So if I zoom out, this is what I'm left with. It just gives me an indication of where the shadows may be changing simply because of the shape is changing. In this case, I'm not too worried about making it look 100% realistic. I'm worried about where each little area works off. Now, last thing I can do is start adding onto his clothes, just give a quick indication of where the clothes may be. In this case, we're not going to break this down into planes. Instead, I'm going to worry more about shadows, lights, and darks. Whenever you do someone's portrait, the focal point is always going to be their eyes and their face. Therefore, that should have the most detail. And then usually what they're wearing has the least amount of detail. So I'm not even going to worry about being 100% accurate with all of this, because I'm not going to add too much detail to it at the very end. I want the face, the eyes, the hair, the nose, ears to have the most detail when I'm working on this. Now that I've got the planes of the face set up, I can start doing my value study for the rest of my painting.